Testing. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to this session. My name is Andrew Tom, and I'm a senior data analyst at DBT Labs and also your MC. The title of this talk is Do Analytics Teams Need Product Managers? And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Caroline Rhodes has spent her career working at early-stage SaaS companies throughout the Boston area. She's held many roles, including analyst, product manager, analytics engineer, and today she's a senior manager of an analytics engineering team at a healthcare company based in Boston called Wellframe. And some quick housekeeping before we begin. All chat conversation and Q&A, please direct it towards our Slack channel in our DBT community Slack called Coalesce, Do Analytics Teams Need PMs? After the session's over, our speaker will hang around for a little while to answer questions that surface in the Slack channel. Without further ado, let's get started. Over to you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today to speak to you all. Thank you for coming to this session. I think it's a really interesting topic. It's funny when I've walked around telling people, oh, I'm speaking later, and I say my topic is, do analytics teams need product managers? I met with a lot of like, oh, interesting. So I'm gonna try to do that justice. Please join the Slack channel. I think that's probably gonna be the most interesting part, hearing everyone's opinions and fostering some good discussion there. So that said, hi, I'm Caroline. I currently am a senior manager of an analytics engineering team at a company called Wellframe based in Boston. Previously, as mentioned, I've been an analyst and I've been a data product manager previously, which has informed a lot of the content you are about to see. On some of my career interests, I love talking about how to best onboard data folks into data teams, as well as how to think about leading and designing data teams. And on a personal note, I love to sew and I love to read. If you see me, say hi. I would love to chat. So let's get into it. The problem question at hand. Do analytics teams need product managers? Now, to set expectations early on, I think the less exciting answer is it depends. And it really does. That does hold true for a lot of things we do. Different organizations have different personalities, have different approaches and strategies. So it really does depend. I'm sure there's folks in the room that have worked with data PMs and have had phenomenal experiences of collaboration and partnership. Maybe there's people in the room that have worked with data PMs and have had less phenomenal experiences. And maybe there's folks in the room that are thinking, does my analytics team need a PM? So what's my opinion? My opinion is no, if you're an earlier stage company. And I'm going to walk you through why I think that. So I'm going to talk about some of my experiences. I want to talk a little bit about the history of product, and if there's product managers in the audience, you can keep me honest about this in the Slack channel. Some of the problems product teams solve, some of the problems analytics teams solve, and to kind of sum up some of my points, I have an analogy I want to share. So analytics at Wellframe, what does that look like? As mentioned, I run the analytics engineering vertical. Part of the broader data org, we also have data engineering and data science, and we roll up to the CEO. Somewhat recently, I retitled folks on my team from analyst to analytics engineer. They were doing analytics engineering type work. You know, we're using DBT, we're using engineering best practices, et cetera. And we also talk about what we own as a data product. We're responsible for Looker, which is our BI tool, and the experience all of our internal teams, whether it's our account management teams, our clinical teams, because we're in healthcare, or our product teams, their experience with Looker. We also build standard dashboards in Looker that go to our customers, and we build data extracts that go to our customers. And you know, we follow a release schedule. We make updates to those things. We have to publish release notes, all that type of thing. Here's the thing. My team does not have a product manager. Actually, none of the teams in the data org have a product manager. And it was, I think, a little bit before this summer, I had an engineering lead ask me, well, why don't you have a product manager? You have a team that have engineering in their title. You have a data product. you kind of operate like an engineering team. You know, we do stand-up, we do sprint planning, et cetera. We have sprints. Why don't you have a product manager? And I found myself hesitating to say, fair question, but also why are we assuming we as an analytics team would have a product manager? And it's my experience as a data PM, which was my previous role, that I think really caused that hesitation I felt. So I was a data PM. I was responsible for the data warehouse, and I worked with a phenomenal group of data engineers. They actually introduced me to DBT, so shout out to them. And honestly, I was so excited for the role. I was like, this is going to be great. I know data. I know, how to set up a data warehouse. I had helped build out a data product in my previous company. I'm going to be able to add so much value. I'm so excited. And I really struggled with the role. It was really hard. And I felt redundant, and I felt like I was playing a bad game of telephone all the time. The data warehouse we were responsible for, we had a team of about 14 analysts, I want to say, that would, they were our customers. They were who we were building the data warehouse for. And there would be times where an analyst and data engineer would sit down, figure out what they want to do, and be like, all right, we know what needs to get done. And I'd say, wait a second, I need to be in the room. And they'd be like, why? I'm like, I don't know. I think it's my job, though. So hold on, you have to go through me. So that kind of felt weird, because I was like, you guys can handle it on your own. You don't necessarily need me. And then on the flip side, I might sit down with an analyst, and we'd go through all the detail, and he'd say the analyst would communicate exactly what they needed, and I'd write out all the logic, and I was like, if I have another 2 hours, I could just write the SQL code for this, and we'd be all done. And instead, I would have to pass it to the data engineer, and inevitably, I'd miss some detail or not know some nuance of the data, and the data engineer would just have to go back and talk to the analyst again. And I think there were, reflecting on my experience as a data PM, absolutely there are things I could have done differently. And I was new to the org, new to the role. And other complications were we had a decentralized data leadership at that time. We had someone leading the analytics team, and they had a different reporting structure than me, who had a different reporting structure than the leader of the data engineering team, different reporting structure. And so we weren't necessarily even aligned, and I felt like I had this impossible task of trying to wrangle everyone when all the priorities were all over the place. Additionally, we did double the size of the company in 1 year. We went from 500 to 1,000. I was one of those 500 new hires, and there was just kind of, some general chaos, if we're being honest. But with that said, when I was a data PM, I was like, what am I supposed to be doing here? How can I possibly add value? I was so excited for this role. What can I do? And it sent me down this rabbit hole of okay, well, what does product even do? What is the history of product? And so it was in the product we think about starting back in the 1930s with Procter & Gamble, where a memo was written asking for more resources and for what was called brand men or brand women, where they really wanted folks focused on the brand and being the internal voice of the customer. And this was kind of the first incarnation of product. And then HP adopted this as well and attributed a lot of their success to having this role in this internal voice of the customer. I think probably the experience of product in the early days was more akin to how we think about product marketing today and what they do. Then came about purely software companies, and software was really expensive and timely to build. And if you missed and misunderstood what the customer needed, that was really expensive to undo. And so it was imperative that you get the voice of the customer in early, and that product role can help do that. Then in 2001, Google promoted Marissa Mayer to product manager. And she built out this team, and it went really well. And she even developed an associate product manager program to bring in new talent. And as you could expect from there, a lot of tech companies were like, all right, well, we're going to follow what Google does. And you saw all this development of product courses and books about this is what product is. And if you search, I was looking at all these quotes from various chief product officers, and some were like, the fun thing about product is it's so broad. That's also the challenging thing. Or another quote I saw was like, oh, product, they do whatever needs to be done to get the product built. And I think about where this landed us today. where we had this really broad role. The origins were around this notion of brand and voice of customer. And now today, we're starting to see some of this specialization. You Google product manager roles, you're going to see things like growth PM, data PM, API PM, technical PM. And I also think the product management experience can vary greatly from company to company. And honestly, it kind of reminds me of the data science role a little bit. But so here we are today with some of this specialization. And I think even that specialization, it's like, what does that mean? Are you going to be acting as actually a scrum master? Are you a technical project manager in reality? Or maybe you're like super removed from the technical side and you're like business strategy. And so I think what's the role today? I think it does depend. I do think there are probably a few things that we could all agree on that product mostly does. They're there to understand and represent the customer needs. They own the vision and roadmap. They are helping determine prioritization. And they're using research and influence to lead teams. Engineers don't report to product managers. They report to engineering managers. I've seen product as often being described as the intersection between business, tech, and design. They sit right in the middle where the expectation is maybe they have a really deep background in one of those things, but they're able to speak to all of those things. So if product sits at that intersection, it's like, okay, well, where do analytics teams sit? And I think analytics teams are also at an intersection. If product is the traffic cop for design, tech, and business, I think analytics teams are also a traffic cop between the business and tech side of things. Analytics teams, in my mind, they're responsible for insights, and those insights need to ultimately drive the business forward. And in order to do that, they have to know the business. They have to understand what the business is trying to achieve. And people on analytics teams are they're not software developers. I think about them separately. I think about software developers, they're building code and they're shipping it, and that's great, and we need them to do that. But with analytics teams, it's a little different. The data tech stack has evolved from this build to buy paradigm. And I think that's simplified things a little bit for the analytics teams. They no longer need to think about building these custom data tech stacks. They need to know the tech, do not get me wrong. They need to know how all these vendors integrate and how to set that up. But they also need to be very centered in the business. And I think to drive some of these points home, I want to walk through an analogy. Imagine you have an idea for a startup. It's going to be this great thing. People are going to come to your storefront, they're going to sit down, and you're going to serve them a meal. It's called a restaurant. It's going to go really well. It's going to be good. So you're like, okay, who do I need to hire first? And you're like, I'm going to hire some chefs. These chefs are going to be great. They're going to build these elaborate meals from scratch. They're going to combine multiple dishes to create this cool, unique customer experience. They're constantly innovating, constantly building these new meals. And that works really well. And things are going well, but the chefs get busy because customers are coming in. You're starting to get momentum. Not a problem. You're going to hire servers. And servers are going to meet and greet the customers. They're in charge of the front of the house. And they're going to take feedback they hear from the customers, and they're going to bring it back to the chefs and say, hey, I heard this, may want to change that, et cetera, et cetera. And that goes really well. And then one day, you're like, we've been hearing a lot of feedback from our customers. They want drinks. How are we going to do drinks? So should we have the chefs do the drinks? And it's like, oh, well, now we got to train them on how to make drinks, et cetera. All right, we could have the servers do the drinks. And they're like, oh, they're really busy. Then you're like, you know what? I think I could hire bartenders. And these bartenders are going to be very unique because they're going to have to be able to speak directly with the customers. They're going to have to be able to think on the fly and build these custom drinks for the customers. And they're also going to have to work really closely with the chefs and servers. They're going to have to provide standardized drinks to the servers so the servers can take those to their tables. And they're going to have to make sure that the drinks the bartenders are making are complementing the meals of the chefs. So they have to know what the chefs are working on and what the chefs are doing. So you build out your restaurant, and it works really well. And for a second, you think, well, wait a second. Why should the bartender also talk directly to the customer? We can put a server behind the bar. But the reality is, behind the bar actually isn't that big. And if you put a server behind there, you start to crowd the space. And that's exactly how I felt when I was a data PM. I felt like I was crowding the space. The analytics and the data engineers could talk directly to each other. They didn't necessarily need me in there. And additionally, if I was in there, it might mean that someone else is taking a backseat to understanding the business problems. And I needed the analytics teams and the data engineers, honestly, to really understand the business problems to know how to best use the data. So if we go back to our original question, do analytics teams need product managers? I think they need really good bar managers. They need to know that they own this bar. They need to be well organized behind the bar. They need to know what the vision is for the bar. And they need to be able to execute that and to have the tools to do that. Analytics teams need really strong leaders. And maybe that strong leader is in the form of a data product manager. Maybe it's in the form of a data steward, a project manager, or maybe a head of data. All those things work. I'm a full believer in when we think about like, oh, run your data as a product team, have a vision, mission roadmap. I'm bought into that. I think that's great. I think they need that. I'm not convinced you have to have a special person called a product manager to make those things happen. These analytics teams, the strong leaders, need to make sure they're building out a team that has really deep understanding of the business problems. I cannot stress that enough. And they also need to have that technical expertise and acumen to tackle these business problems. Again, they sit right at the intersection of tech and business. So when I think about looking forward, I think running your team like a product team does not necessarily mean you have to have a product manager. You could, and that, again, might work great for you. But I think a company maturity stage really matters, and I think early on, I'm not sure it's that important, as much as it is important to have a really strong analytics leader. And I also just want us to be a little more intentional and not reactive. Going back to my earlier point, people heard data as a product. They heard, okay, you have engineers on your team, and all right, you do stand-up and Scrum type ceremonies. You need a product manager. And I'm just asking, let's pause and think, is that really true? And maybe it is, and maybe that is the direction we want to continue going. But maybe, analytics teams are very different than software engineering teams, and we need to think on that. That's all I got. Thank you so much for coming and listening.
Caroline, thank you so much for an awesome talk. For those in the room, again, a reminder, please drop your questions and comments in that Slack channel. Coalesce, do analytics teams need PMs? Our next talk in this room is titled Testing Our Assertions versus Reality, and that'll start at 4:45 Central Time. See you then.